Ever wondered who really pulls the strings of the global economy? For centuries, you could pretty much point to a handful of powerful families. But today? Well, the answer is a whole lot more complicated. We're going to trace how financial power went from famous last names to a huge, almost invisible system that shapes all of our lives. So let's dive right in. To really get the story, you've got to start with this idea, something Napoleon supposedly said way back when. Money has no fatherland. Their sole object is gain. That just perfectly captures it, right? It's about a kind of power that doesn't care about borders or flags. It's driven by one thing and one thing only: profit. And that is the thread that runs through this entire story. Okay, so our story really kicks off in the 18th and 19th centuries. Back then, incredible financial power was building up in two totally different ways, on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So, over in Europe, you had power built on this really sophisticated international finance. Families like the Rothschilds were creating banking networks so big and so powerful that even governments had to rely on them. But then over in America, wealth was literally bursting from the ground. Guys like John D. Rockefeller built massive empires on real stuff, like oil, controlling whole industries from top to bottom. We're talking two completely different worlds of money. And just look at this. This gives you an idea of the sheer scale of that European model. The Rothschilds didn't just own a bank. They ran a coordinated, family-operated network that stretched across all the major financial hubs of Europe. This was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first truly international banking group. I mean, what a revolutionary idea for the time. It let them move money and influence politics across an entire continent. So as we get to the end of the 19th century, these two giant pools of capital, European finance and American industry, they started to get closer. And a new class of financiers popped up to basically build the bridge between them. Now, it's really important to get this straight. This wasn't some kind of formal merger. No single company was created. Think of it more like a complex web of shared financial interests, strategic partnerships, and personal connections between the biggest players of the era. And these were the guys who built that bridge. You had figures like J.P. Morgan, who became the go-to guy for funneling European money into America's exploding industries. You had Jacob Schiff, a master strategist arranging the financing for giants like Rockefeller. And then there was Paul Warburg, the expert who brought over all those sophisticated, structured ideas about central banking from Europe to the still kind of Wild West of American finance. But here's the thing. A system that's built on personal handshakes and the power of just a few guys, well, it has a fatal flaw. It's incredibly shaky. And in 1907, a massive financial crisis hit that exposed this weakness and forced a huge, permanent change. The Panic of 1907 was an absolute financial firestorm. It kicked off with a failed gamble on the stock market, but it spiraled out of control so fast, a huge trust company collapsed, panic spread like wildfire, people were literally lining up in the streets to pull their money out of the banks. There was no central bank to stop the bleeding, and the whole system was about to go down until one man, J.P. Morgan himself, stepped in and basically saved the day. So what's the big lesson here? The Panic of 1907 proved, without a doubt, that having your entire financial system depend on the goodwill and the deep pockets of one 70-year-old man was just not a sustainable plan for a modern country. The old way of doing things was officially broken. They needed a new, systemic solution, and they needed it fast. And that desperate search for a new solution led directly to the single biggest transformation in the history of American financial power: the creation of a central bank. Power was about to make a huge shift, from individual men to an entire system. Now, the public story, the official line for why a central bank was needed, was simple, and it made a lot of sense. To stop another devastating panic like the one in 1907, America needed a powerful institution that could stabilize the banks and manage the money supply. That was the accepted official reason for creating the Federal Reserve. But there's another side to this story. Some sources, like the book Currency Wars, put forward a very different version of events. They allege that the real plan wasn't hammered out in public debate, but in a top-secret meeting where the biggest names in finance got together on a private island to design the new system themselves for their own benefit. And according to that source, this was the guest list for that secret meeting on Jekyll Island. I mean, it's basically a who's who of American money and power, with guys from the Morgan, Rockefeller, and Rothschild circles of influence all there. The allegation, essentially, is that the very people who held all the power in the old, broken system got together in secret to write the rules for the new one. But look, regardless of exactly how it was born, the end result was the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This officially created the system we have today, and it marks that exact moment that power became institutionalized, moving out of the personal control of men like JP Morgan and into the structured rule-based power of the Fed. But the story doesn't stop in 1913. Not even close. After the utter devastation of World War II, this whole model of systemic financial control, it went global. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, leaders from around the world got together to deliberately build a new global financial order from the ground up. And out of this meeting, you get two brand new pillars for this system: the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to keep currency stable, and the World Bank to fund reconstruction and development. A truly global system was born. So you might be asking, what happened to those powerful old families? Did they just fade away? No, not at all. Their power just evolved. Instead of pulling the strings directly, their influence was now channeled through the very institutions they helped bring into being: the giant global banks, the international funds, the whole new world order. And that brings us right up to the present day, and the ultimate question. After this whole long evolution, where does financial power actually live now? This slide just sums it all up perfectly. Power went from being personal — you could literally point to a Rothschild, a Morgan, or a Rockefeller — to being systemic and abstract. Today, power lives inside the complex architecture of global banking, international flows of money, and central bank policy. It's much harder to see. These are the new titans. Power today isn't held by one single family, but by this massive, interconnected network. Of course, historic names like JP Morgan Chase are still around and are bigger than ever. But now, they're huge pieces inside this larger system, not the sole masters of it. And, maybe the person who understood the sheer weight of this change better than anyone was the man who signed the Federal Reserve into law. Years later, President Woodrow Wilson looked back and said he believed this new system of credit he had created now controlled the nation itself. And that leaves us with one last crucial thought. Power never really vanishes. It just changes its form. In this story, we saw it move from visible people to a much less visible, but arguably far more powerful global system. And the question that leaves for all of us is, what does it mean when the system itself is in control?